Greetings. This is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also, the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. As an African American, I am really concerned about the direction that things are going for several reasons. Of course, we know that we're going through a worldwide pandemic currently, which is a whole nother topic, and I've done a couple of talks on that. But then we have this incident with George Floyd. George Floyd, who was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or I should say, who died. And we saw a white police officer kneeling on his neck, three other police officers just standing around, acting as though they were, indifferent to this gentleman on the pavement, crying out for his life. And, it sparked so much in the nation that we've had riots and protests, both violent and nonviolent protests. We see so many various movements to defund the police and different things like that in Seattle. I believe it was Seattle. They had this Chaz movement, which was supposed to be a zone that was sovereign, outside of the jurisdiction or authority of the city. And just a lot of things occurring. And what I really want to focus on is, as an African American, we have to be careful as to who we kind of lock arms with the protests. This whole Black Lives Matter movement is one of the many movements, in my estimation, where we see people taking advantage of the plight of the racial discrimination and prejudice that has occurred in this country. And it's not a new thing. I'll just say for the record that, the strategy is very clever. Propaganda is very clever. And so we have to separate the ideal of Black Lives Matter, the concept or the phrase, from the movement. Right now, those things are not separated. They are one and the same. We have to separate ourselves, because I don't believe that there's anyone in this nation who disagrees with the idea that Black Lives Matter. And I would just say, just as a side note, that if you really want to engage someone from the African American community who tells you Black Lives Matter, then the proper response shouldn't be all lives matter, because when you say that, you're going to put yourself in kind of an adversarial position in the conversation, and you may not get a constructive conversation out of the deal. When someone says Black Lives Matter, you say, yes, I agree. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about the deeper issues. Let's talk about the more important issues. And so I want to talk just real quick about how they hijack our movements. They've done that repeatedly. You guys are familiar with the fact that in America, black people were legally enslaved and bought and sold as what was known as chattel slavery. It means that they were property and their children were property. We know that there was Jim Crow. There was things called the Negro Codes in the South. You had legalized segregation. You had Plessy versus Ferguson, which they said separate but equal, but they recognized that separate but equal doesn't work, because the black community consistently got overlooked in regards to resources, educational opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And so then they had a movement for desegregation. Now, I'll say, and I've been saying this over and over again, and I have to continue to repeat this, is that although America had a lot of racism in the past, there's very little racism that goes on in America. And I know that's a controversial statement. People don't want to hear that. They think you're crazy. It's because we're misdiagnosing what racism is. Racism is systematic and institutional separation of people, segregation of people, systematic and institutional. Back in the 1950s, I believe it was, or the 1960s, Governor of Alabama, George Wallace, stood on the steps of the University of Alabama, and he publicly declared that no black person would be able to attend the University of Alabama. We know that after the civil rights movement, the civil rights laws, that made it illegal for him to publicly say that. Now, when he made that statement, and it held true at the time, no black people were legally allowed to attend the University of Alabama, that was racism. It was systematic. It was a college or a university by edict of the governor and probably the president of the university that that discriminated against black people simply because they were black, right? They could have been a 4.0 student, genius, 150 IQ, but simply because of the fact that they were black, they were disqualified in attending the University of Alabama. That's what systemic racism is. Now, the Civil Rights Bill. So you had the Civil Rights Bill 1957, you have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and you have subsequent hate crimes legislation that was passed that makes it illegal to discriminate against someone based on race, ethnicity, country of origin, sex. Now they've added, of course, gender and gender identity and some other things they've added. But I want to focus mainly on the fact that it is illegal in America to discriminate against someone based on their color of their skin, their race, their ethnicity, or their country of origin. It is illegal. If you can prove that someone mistreated you based on skin color, then you have a legal case against them. Case in point, there used to be something called redlining. Redlining that occurred. So let me back up real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but when they passed the Housing Act, Housing and Urban Development Act, or Housing Act, I think it was Roosevelt with the, it was based on socialism. After the Great Depression, he created the Housing Act, where they created housing projects. They created the suburbs. And in many places, many areas, or most places, the suburbs actually had laws that forbid a black person to live in those areas. Then they also, what they did was, banks had a practice called redlining. And of course, it happened primarily in the black communities, the black urban areas, where they devalued the property values of houses. They made it almost impossible to get a loan, et cetera, et cetera. These practices were revealed as being racist and discriminatory. And so the Fair Housing Act was passed that made it illegal to discriminate against someone, these practices that I mentioned, or any other type of discrimination based on skin color, race, ethnicity, whatever you want to call it, country of origin. It was illegal to discriminate based on that. Now, did it still occur? Yes, it did. But what happened was there were many instances where when it was discovered that they were still practicing those things, then there were actual court decisions, civil suits and different things, sanctions that were taken out against those institutions, and people were paid money when they found out that they had discriminated against them. There were huge settlements that had occurred because, again, it was illegal to discriminate against someone based on race and skin color, right? Ethnicity, all those various ways that we segregate people, right? So when people say it's still racism, and this is a racist country, and they use those examples, they are actually disproving their point. Because although redlining still occurred afterwards, it was against the law, and they had to hide it. Once it was exposed, there were legal sanctions taken against those organizations. That's how you combat racism. That's why it's so important for us to understand what racism actually is. Because when you misdiagnose something as racism and it's not racism, it just increases the level of frustration because you never solve the problem. You never come to a solution. That's why it's important for us to rightly diagnose the problem. Now, is there still bias and prejudice and bigotry? Yes, absolutely. For instance, the incidents with George Floyd, for instance, the police force, as a matter of fact, the chief of police in Minneapolis is a person of color, which is interesting. And a lot of these police forces, the police chief is a black or Hispanic or someone of color. So obviously it wasn't his it wasn't his policy to discriminate against black people when he's a person of color himself. So what when those things happen is the people that are being accused of doing something go out of their way to prove that it wasn't based on race. They try to introduce other facts, because if you ever prove without a shadow of a doubt that it was based on race, Like if they had something written down as a policy of the police that says that, target black people or arrest black people, that's racism. But when you have prejudice, biased people, you have bigots, you can't solve that by law. You can't pass a law because bigotry, bias, and prejudice are internal things. It comes from the heart. They're heart issues. They are biases that people hold in their heart that a law can't change. You have to attack that problem through different channels. Primarily, if you deal with bigotry and bias and prejudice, you have to educate, you have to expose, and you have to train people. So I'm sure that there's still a lot of people that are prejudiced or biased because every human being is biased and prejudiced. Every single human being has some type of bias or another. Whether or not you think, a certain group of people are smarter than others or better. If you're more suspicious of a certain person, like for instance, as an African American male, I'm in the city all the time. If I'm in this inner city and I see young black males huddled around on the corner and they have hoodies on or white tees or whatever, there's a certain assumption that I carry because of my experiences, because of my knowledge of that situation. Now, it could be that those young men are standing there. They could be a singing group. They could be a sports team. They could be brothers, biological brothers that just happen to be standing together. Those are possibilities. But the assumption that you carry from the door is that there's something else going on, usually something more nefarious going on. That's a bias or prejudice. We all have those, no matter who you are. And I bet you if you got black people to go into the black neighborhood and saw that same scene, they would have certain assumptions as to what was going on. That's just how we are as human beings. We don't wake up every day with a clean slate. I don't wake up every day and my past memories have been erased. I have a certain experiences that I carry with me that shape and mold how I perceive the world. That's just, it's impossible not to do that. So when you talk about bigotry, bias, prejudice, those type of things, you can't combat them passing laws. You have to educate, inform, you have to expose them to different people and different cultures. You have to create dialogue and interaction. That's how you go about those things. So we have to be careful not to get caught up in fighting racism when racism is not occurring. And I would say as a nation that we've done a whole lot to combat racism. It is illegal in this country to discriminate against someone based on their skin color. For the most part, you may find little small sectors here and there. You may even find reverse racism at times, right? So, but what I'm saying is, as far as discrimination against black people and other people of color and other groups, it is illegal in this country, which means that to people's to contrast what people are saying, this is not a racist nation. And I know that's not an easy conversation because everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon. Everyone wants to chime in. And a lot of it's based on emotions. It's based on past experiences. It's based on the fact that me as an African American person, I've been discriminated against because of my color. I've been mistreated. I have been racially profiled by police in the past. All these things are realities that we dealt with. It's a real thing. It has happened. But now in 2020, does it happen to the same extent? I don't believe so. I'm sure there's still pockets where it happens. I think that people are more culturally sensitive than ever before. I think people will go out of their way a lot of times now and not operating based on those assumptions and those biases and prejudice and stereotypes. You think about in America, there's about 700,000 police officers. If you say 20 or 30 bad cops out of 700,000, that's a very small percentage. And I think it's safe to assume that the majority of police officers are good people, hardworking. They're not evil people trying to kill people because of their skin color. So we have to not fall into this kind of groupthink that tells us things that may or may not necessarily be true. So this has been Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church and the founder of the 2019 movement. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. Love you.